Hey guys, welcome to the YouTube live. This is actually one of the few times that I've done a live feed. I'm going to go ahead and do a tactical review podcast about the latest shootings that were in Texas and Dayton, Ohio. Talk about what happened, ways that you could prevent what happened happening to you, some tactics to take away. Also talk about the politics that are involved, and I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. All right, so I'm going live. 3, 2, 1. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Fieldcraft Survival Podcast. This is another episode of the Tactical Review Podcast, where we take the latest tactics, techniques, and procedures as applied to real situations in the real world and assess, obviously, lessons learned and things to take away. You know, tactics are always changing. They're always being shaped by reality. And if you're not prepared to shape your tactics in countering those potential tactics, then you're not prepared. And preparedness is freedom, as we always say. So hey, yeah, if you guys are just tuning into the news, some people, I was surprised. Some people this morning texted me and didn't even realize that there was these tragic events that took place in Texas, El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio. A lot of people, like me and my little circle of friends, they like to get off grid and get away from the news, get away from their phones. And so a lot of people were shocked, obviously, when they got back to their phones and the headlines read that there was 2 mass shootings that happened in less than a 24-hour period, where there was 31 people killed total. Now, the death toll has rose in the Texas shooting. It's now 21. Unfortunately, one person died in the hospital recently. So that death toll is up to 21 with 20 plus people injured. Also the Ohio shooting, we know right now that the death toll is at 9 with multiple injuries. I believe right now the injuries are sitting at 20 people, 20 plus people injured in that shooting as well. And so when we look at these 2 shootings, one, it's a tragedy. It's unfortunate. A lot of people, when they tune into the news and they see something happening in America where one person can go into a situation and senselessly murder in a public setting a whole bunch of innocent people, that's shocking. A lot of politicians, a lot of people even on social media have come out and said, "Oh, this shouldn't be shocking," because I think even Neil deGrasse Tyson came out, who's a known scientist, came out and said, "Hey, you guys are paying attention to, you need to pay attention to the data, not to the headlines." But I kind of disagree with that sentiment, because, when somebody has the ability to go into a setting like a public place where you're supposed to be safe. We're not talking about crime in the inner city. I think he made the example that 500 a day or something like that die from the flu. We're not talking about diseases. We're not talking about viruses. We're talking about a human being going into a safe setting, a public setting, and then murdering as many people as they can until they're taken out or until they surrender. So let's talk about the Texas shooting first. El Paso, Texas. This is becoming headlines for all the news agencies across. But in El Paso, Texas, a lone gunman released the manifesto, basically a confession letter of why he did what he did, or the purpose, the task and purpose behind what he was doing. And it was what I found was pretty interesting about his manifesto is the amount of detail that he included inside of this 4-page manifesto. And then after he released it, I believe he tweeted it, he went to Walmart and decided to do this attack. Here's some things that we know about this shooting. One, this shooter was armed with an AK-47. He walked into a Walmart, which was adjacent to a shopping center, a shopping mall. He went in there and started firing and killing as many people as he could. He actually started in the parking lot, walked inside of the building, and then started taking out as many people as he could. He winded up killing a total of 21 people. There was a lot of victims, a lot of injuries. 26 people were total wounded. He's a 21-year-old white male from a Dallas suburb. After he circulated this online manifesto, which is noted right now, obviously in the media, for his hatred for the Hispanic people, which was completely racist. I read it probably an hour after the shooting itself. I saw it, I found it, and I read it, and immediately knew this guy was insane. And then as he walks in, he starts killing as many people as he could. Police officers were on scene within 6 minutes. So from the time that first shot was fired, and it was reported via 911, place in which he purchased this rifle, but it was an AK-47. It was also noted that he was using extended magazines in this situation. Just like we talked about the week prior in the tactical review, where an SKS was utilized, this is a semi-automatic 7.62 by 39 millimeter semi-automatic rifle. It is known as being an assault rifle. I don't know what denotes or what differentiates a rifle from an assault rifle, and I would think that it's pretty speculative, not based on a lot of information or education. If you take an AK-47 or SKS, which was used by the Russians, by the Chinese, by the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War against Americans, it was probably considered a semi-automatic rifle, right? Which all rifles are semi-automatic for the most part, that have gas operating systems, meaning every time you pull the trigger, a bullet goes boom, as opposed to holding the trigger and it shoots on automatic. So these rifles are rifles, semi-automatic rifles, as opposed to a bolt gun rifle where you would action the bolt and you would ride it back to the rear, extracting the round and then inserting a round manually. A semi-automatic would automatically, based on the gas operating system, whether it's gas tappet or gas impingement, or gas piston, would drive the mechanics of the gun and then cycle the gun every time it's shot, which would obviously increase your ability between shot to shoot faster. And so this guy goes in and he's got this manifesto that he writes, and I'm going to read some of that for you guys. And one of the reasons, a lot of critics come out and they say, hey, never talk about the shooter, never mention the shooter, never show their face, and then never talk about what their motives were. I think that's insanity. I think that, number one, I think that's stupidity, and that's the same mindset that puts us in these type of situations where, these politicians, which I'll talk about a little later on the podcast, all these people have these knee-jerk reactions, these political actions, even President Trump this morning saying all these things very reactively, and we don't want to face the reality of what is actually happening. So when people say, hey, don't show the shooter's name. Well, why the fuck would you not show the shooter's name? I want to know who the shooter is, because I want to know on open in media, right? And I want to show as many people who that person is, because I want to know his associates. I want to know his affiliates. I want to know the people that were around that person right before they shot the person, or know them historically because they grew up with them, what kind of person they are. Because a better understanding of who these people are will get us to a point in which we can make better decisions to prevent things like this from happening in the future. I also want to know his name, because I want responsibility and onus by the family, by the friends, by the people who could have prevented this, because they were in the circle and then took it as a joke, which I think is one of the main issues that we deal with in mental health, where we never take anything seriously, and then after shit hits the fan, we always go, yeah, I always thought that guy was off, but you never said or did anything about it. I also wanted to know their motivations, because I want to know, this isn't just a special operations, counter argument for counterintelligence or understanding the enemy, but I want to know what this guy's motivations were to prevent it in the future. Just, it's common sense. You know, if there's an ideology that's somehow underground right now, that's breeding these kids to grow up to play video games where they shoot people virtually in the face, and then they become programmed, disassociative from their reality, can take a gun and then go walk into Walmart and kill people. I want to know why the hell they're doing it and what their motivations are. So let me skim through this manifesto and talk about some of the things that stand out to me. One, he calls this thing the inconvenient truth. He says, about me, in general, I support the Christchurch shooter and his manifesto. This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. They are the instigators, not me. I am simply defending my country from cultural and ethnic replacement brought on by an invasion. You know, obviously, him saying just that, the guy's racist. He's a white, what would be considered a white nationalist by the left. And he's obviously living in a fantasy world. Some people, this is back to the manifesto, some people would think this statement is hypocritical because of the nearly complete ethnic and cultural destruction brought to the Native Americans by our European ancestors, but this just reinforces my point. The natives didn't take the invasion of Europeans seriously, and now what's left is a shadow of what was. My motives for this attack are not at all personal. Actually, the Hispanic community was not my target before I read The Great Replacement. This manifesto will cover the political and economic reasons behind the attack, my gear, my expectations of what response will generate, and my personal motivations and thoughts. Now here's what you have to understand about a manifesto. It's just like anything. It's like your 200 words on your Instagram post that you write every morning. Everything you're writing is a deliberate act in influencing or manipulating your audience. I mean, you wouldn't write what you write unless you wanted to have an influence. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a bad thing, but you're manipulating people's behavior and minds and thoughts about you. And so understand that when I read this manifesto, he is shaping the picture that he wants you to perceive. And that's important to understand. A lot of people, which I'm assuming one of the reasons this kid became who he became, is because of the way he thought about things, where he heard things and took them literally, instead of understanding that things are more complex or complicated than just the black and white reasoning of things. The first thing he talks about is his political reasons. He says, in short, America is rotting from the inside out, and peaceful means to stop this seem to be nearly impossible. The inconvenient truth is that our leaders, both Democratic and Republican, have been failing us for decades. They are either complacent or involved in one of the biggest betrayals of the American public in our history, the takeover of the U.S. government by unchecked corporations. I could write a 10-page essay on the damage these corporations have caused. But here is what is important. Due to the death of the baby boomers, the increasingly anti-immigrant, I'm not even going to read this portion of it, because I want to extract the information that's going to be important for us countering this. And he does a lot of talk about things that he has no idea about. Policy. He has no idea about policy. You know where he gets his information on policy? The far right and the far left. There's nobody in between. And so when he reads this, that's where he's extracting these ideas, and a lot of it isn't tailored in reality. It's just disconnected from reality, so it's not real. He says the heavy Hispanic population in Texas will make us a Democratic stronghold. Losing Texas and a few other states with heavy Hispanic population to the Democrats is all it would take for them to win nearly every presidential election. Now, obviously, what he doesn't understand is Texas, California, has always been heavy with Hispanics. One, because it used to be Mexico. Two, is that we established borders, but that didn't mean the demographic changed. The borders just created a line in the sand, but it's always been a heavily Hispanic community. I mean, that's this twisted white mind is some sense that Texas is white. Texas isn't white. I lived in San Antonio, Texas. I had a Special Forces Reserve Detachment, National Guard Detachment, and 19 Special Forces Group in San Antonio, and the diversity of Hispanics in that community, all over Texas, is vast. And so, he's talking about it as if Texas was white or is white, and now, I would say that living outside of Dallas, Texas, in the corporate concrete suburbs, you might get that picture every single day in your day-to-day life. But the reality is that's not what it is. It's a heavy Hispanic community. It used to be Mexico. Okay, economic reasons. In short, immigration can only be detrimental to the future of America. And see, this is the problem I have with racist bigots like this, is this idea that America is this one thing. I served in the military and was proud to operate with black guys, with white dudes, with Hispanics and Asians, because that was a good sign of our diverse population in America, because America isn't just a white place. And that's why I hate that he's fueling these left actors, these left-wing extremists, filling them with ammo because they're like, see, I told you so. But I don't even know what white is. What is white? I'm half white, I think. Being half Norwegian or Scandinavian and then half Korean, what the fuck am I? I'm not a white dude. I grew up in a black neighborhood in Daytona Beach, Florida, on the black side of the tracks, where my white grandma lived in a black neighborhood, where I, as an Asian kid, played basketball on the basketball courts, and they called me Wonder Bread because they thought I was a white kid with Asian eyes. And so when you look at America, it's diverse, but this kid doesn't see it that way. So America needs to be this one thing. And I'm assuming, based on his rhetoric, it's this one white thing, which is the complete opposite of what it is. It's what makes us great is the fact that we are diverse and we come from all over the world. I just don't like labels. Don't call me white because I'm not white. Is the white dude walking down the street that you say he's a white nationalist and he's actually Russian or he's actually European, is he white? What is white? I think this rhetoric of dividing us, which is both false on the left and right, and from this idiot, is that that's not how it should be thought of. But obviously this kid does think that way. I'm going to bypass the economic reasons and get to the gear. So he said his main gun was an AK-47, a WASR-10. He says, I realized pretty quickly that it isn't a great choice since it's a civilian version of the AK. It's not designed to shoot rounds quickly, so it overheats massively after about 100 shots fired in quick succession. Well, yeah, you dumbass. Any gun that you shoot in quick succession will overheat massively, especially if you shoot 100 rounds of 7.62 by 39. He said, I'll have to use a heat-resistant glove to get around this. 8M3 bullet. This bullet, unlike pretty much any other 7.62 by 39, actually fragments like a pistol hollow point when shot out of an AK-47 at the cost of penetration. Penetration is still reasonable, but not nearly as high as a normal AK-47. The AK-47 is definitely a bad choice without this bullet design, and may still be with it. Other guns, AR-15. Pretty much any variation of this gun doesn't heat up nearly as fast as the AK-47. The round of this gun isn't designed to fragment, but instead tumbles inside a target, causing lethal wounding. This gun is probably better, but I wanted to explore different options. The AR-15 is probably the best gun for military applications, but this isn't a military application. Interesting. What I take from that is, one, he thinks he knows a lot about tactics, guns, and he knows absolutely nothing. I'm not even going to tell you the right to his wrong in this instance. What I will say is that you have to understand the mind right, of these kind of people who do this kind of shit, which is this guy has an idea because he's informed. He's on the internet. He's doing research and he's trying to figure shit out, and then he's putting stuff together. And so now if I'm thinking from the outside looking in, I'm saying to myself, the AR-15, he just said that it's probably the best gun, but for military applications, but this isn't a military application. The AK-47 is the gun of choice. He did kill this many people. This gun is the danger to society. And then the list goes on about all the rants that can go in about why that mindset or that path of thinking is the wrong path to thinking. He says this will be a test of which is more lethal. Either it's fragmentation or tumbling. He obviously knows nothing about external ballistics or terminal ballistics. I didn't spend much time at all prepping for this attack, maybe a month, probably less. I have to do this before I lose my nerve. I figured that an underprepared attack and a manifesto is better than no attack and no manifesto. So what you have to understand about this is it creates a timeline for us. How many people, I mean, just think about this. How many people do you think deliberately plan murdering as many people as they can in a mass shooting but never execute? Think about that. How many people are stopped in their tracks by the FBI, by local law enforcement, by friends and family, and they don't get to the point in which they kill people? I mean, really think about that. Think about what it takes to combat this kind of deliberate timeline. We used to say in special operations, the easiest job on the planet is being a terrorist. Because you wake up in the morning and you go, maybe I don't feel like going to work today. I'm not going to attack anybody. I'm just going to hang out, drink coffee, and just do my thing. But maybe tomorrow I will. And so everybody is forced to react based on your timeline. But it's only when you execute, only when you act can we react. Because we can't assume. We can't assume, which is one of the problems I'll talk about later in the podcast, we can't assume that everybody, because they're going through mental health issues, is going to pick up a gun and go murder people. There are other more pointed and obvious ways to delineate between the two. A manifesto. If a guy writes a manifesto and publishes it on the internet and hasn't carried it out, the dude needs to be in jail, in prison. But will that prevent it? Think about all the variables that we're talking about. There are so many variables, it will blow and boggle your mind. And I've gone after terrorists and tracked terrorists for years, sometimes unsuccessfully, because we're tracking every single thing they're doing, waiting for them to make a mistake, and they never make a mistake. So imagine now looking into an insurgency, because this is what it is. We're looking for our own who are wearing clothes, disguised like us, but ready to pick up a gun and go in and do as much damage as they possibly can. He deliberately planned this for a month in advance. What were the indicators that he was planning something like this? Did he go to the range? Did he buy specific guns? Was he asking questions? I'm sure all three of those are true. He wrote him a manifesto. And he says, I have to do this before I lose my nerve. Meaning, he thought about not doing it. But eventually, he executed it. Let's go to personal reasons and thoughts via this manifesto. I'm going to get past all this racism. My ideology has not changed for several years. My opinions on automation, immigration, and the rest predate Trump and his campaign for president. I'm putting this here because some people will blame the president or certain presidential candidates for the attack. This is not the case. I know that the media will probably call me a white supremacist anyway and blames Trump's rhetoric. The media is infamous for fake news. The reaction to this attack will likely just confirm that. Many people think that the fight for America is already lost. They couldn't be more wrong. This is just the beginning of the fight for America and Europe. I'm honored to head the fight to reclaim my country from destruction. Remember, it's not cowardly to pick low-hanging fruit, aka don't attack heavily guarded areas to fulfill your super soldier Call of Duty fantasy. Attack low security targets, even though you might outgun a security guard or policeman. They likely beat you in armor, training, and numbers. Do not throw away your life on an unnecessarily dangerous target. If a target seems too hot, live to fight another day. So this guy is giving instructions. This is important to know, to understand. He is mass distributing instructions to people to hit soft targets. And he's saying that despite how the media will twist it, he's not a racist. And he morally justifies this, virtuously justifies this by reclaiming his country from destruction. Because, it's interesting because I know all the men and women that I've served with in 20 years of government and special operations work, that those guys and gals were the most significant patriots in the world, in the U.S., that have sacrificed everything, their limbs, their lives, their family lives, their time, blood, sweat, and tears, every single thing they could to fight for their country, being patriotic, reclaiming their country, and fighting for freedom. But this guy goes to a Walmart and kills innocent fathers, mothers, and children and justifies his destruction because he's reclaiming his country. I'm sorry, but this country is not your country. And that's not what we stand for. In fact, I can go on a history lesson for hours communicating that, but it would probably for him fall on deaf ears. What's to note tactically is the fact that people who do things like this don't go after hard targets. We talked about this in the last shooting in California. When the guy goes to a garlic food festival in Gilroy, California, and he sees that they're security checking everybody's bag in a centralized controlled checkpoint, then he knows everybody in that venue is a potential target, a soft target. So, if you think about this, mass shooters or active shooters who target schools, they do so because it's a soft target, because children can't fight back. Most schools don't have armed officers. And so it's an opportunity for some loser to go in and create as much carnage as possible to destroy as many human lives as possible until they're taken out. And now it's a game of time. Because this guy knew inside this manifesto, he actually stated that he knew more than likely he was going to be killed by a police officer. But he gave up. So he knew that he only had a short span of time to create as many casualties as possible. But the only thing that politicians in this case would focus on is the gun. Because the gun is the thing that did bad, not the person. These type of people do not think that way. If you're a terrorist, if you're a criminal, if you're a violent actor, what you want to do is capitalize and exploit weakness. You're not looking at strengths. You don't go in there and go, hey, there's 5 armed guys in front of this store, this is the one I'm going to go. You go next door and you go, oh, this is the one that says no guns allowed. And then there's no security guards because they live in that fantasy world, and that person walks in the front door and kills as many people as he can. And then the politicians who affect policy, shaping the laws in our country, only want to concentrate on the gun. When that person, this idiot, instead of using an AR-15 if he couldn't have got one, instead of using an AK-47 because he couldn't have got one, instead of using a firearm because he was limited in his ability to get one, he would have used his car and mowed down as many people as he could. 19 terrorists on 9/11, 19 terrorists with creative minds and box cutters killed over 3,000 Americans. Think about that. The only closest thing was on Pearl Harbor when you had an entire task force, a strategic plan of suicide attackers attacking the bay of Pearl Harbor. So you have to ask yourself, what can we do? And we'll get to that as soon as I get over over into the Ohio shooting. This one surprised me. Look, this isn't surprising to me. If you've operated overseas in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Yemen, all over the place, in these places that exist outside of the United States that are often talked about, this is an everyday occurrence. It's just different. It's a different agenda. There's different incentives and different motivations, but it happens every single day. So this kid, goes in with his sister and a friend, and they go out in the middle of the night and go to this place in Dayton, Ohio, where there's bars and there are restaurants and there's clubs. And this guy, this young man, is with his younger sister. This one is actually, I can't tell if it's older or younger, but his sister. So this sister is brought with a friend. They all get out of the vehicle together. Then at some point, he goes back to his vehicle, and then he gets a gun, and then he goes on this murder rampage. And the question today on social media and the news is, did he mean to target his sister during the shooting spree? That's the kind of people these dudes are. This person arrived with his sister and the friend. They get out, they go and separate. He goes back to the vehicle, gets a gun, an AR-15 and a shotgun, goes on this murder rampage and kills his own 22-year-old sister and shoots and injures the friend. They're looking for a motive, but they can't find one. I mean, they even state it seems to just defy believability. He would shoot his own sister, but it's hard to believe that he did not recognize that was his sister. Really? Does it defy believability? The dude just murdered 9 human beings. 6 of the 9 slain in this case were African American. But they don't know if race was a motivating factor. The police explain we have a lot of evidence still to go through. Just based on where we're at now, we are not seeing any indication of race being a motive. But we are not through all the evidence. And so until we are through the evidence, we cannot rule that out, but I'm saying we're not seeing any at this time to suggest race is a motive. The gunman was armed with magazines that, if all of them were full, would have carried 250 rounds, and they recovered at least 41 shell casings fired by this guy. This came 13 hours after this loser in Texas opened fire at a Walmart and killed 21. I'm actually reading this now. It says 22 people dead. So that brings the death total to 31. The El Paso murder suspect's grandparents had recently lived with them in Dallas, and this is just a digression because it's talking about the same story, and said the alleged killer moved out of their home 6 weeks ago and they're cooperating with authorities. So this is in the window where he was planning his attack. So not a lot of information known on this kid. He's a white guy, both of them are white guys. This guy gets his AR-15, goes and starts his rampage, winds up killing his sister. They don't know if it's intentional. They're actually surprised. They're not surprised at all that he killed his own sister. And the police put him down in a minute. It's actually referenced as 30 seconds into the arrival of the first responders on scene. This guy was gunned down and killed. 6 minutes on scene in El Paso, 30 seconds on scene with a dead suspect in Dayton, Ohio. One, kudos and thank you so much to the first responders who put their lives on the line and who arrived. I also heard that the guys who arrived on scene in Dayton, Ohio, had AR-15s. So I work with guys, I work with a good buddy of mine, Phil, in Miami, Florida. And he rolls with a team of guys that basically are in a upgraded posture, prepared for these type of events, whether it's gang related, criminal related, or mass shooting related. They show up on scene with AR-15s. If you're a patrolman and you are inbound and en route to an active shooter and you are getting out of your car with your pistol, you're fucking wrong. Every police officer in the United States of America should be trained, qualified, and be carrying an AR-15 inside their patrol car. When they get the call that they're moving to a mass shooting and active shooter, they have seconds. This guy killed 9 people in 30 seconds. 9 people. If police officers missed him or didn't show up in the 30 seconds that they showed up, there'd be a lot more casualties. Thank God for first responders and law enforcement. Thank God for EMS, firefighters, and all the first responders. Thank God. So many people want to talk shit about the police. Who's talking shit when there's an active shooter trying to kill your ass and then you're on the phone with 911? I posted on my story on my personal at mike.a.glover on Instagram. I'm some arrogant dumbass walking around in Walmart as people are getting gunned down. He's in a couple aisles over. He casually walks out, talks shit about everybody, and then goes to another grocery store. I'm assuming he did that for the gram. And it's really cool on the gram because he probably got a few followers out of it. And we'll talk about what you need to do in these type of situations a little later, but completely asinine. So we don't know a lot about this guy. We do know the police and EMS response, and the fact that they showed up so fast is kudos to their training. But if it wasn't for these men and women who put their asses on the line, then this would be a completely different situation this morning that we'd be talking about. We also know that the death toll, which is up to 31 right now, that in that Walmart in El Paso, Texas, there was 1,000 to 3,000 people in the store at the time. I don't know how they get that number. That's a pretty broad number, but that's a lot of people. So he hit it prime time. And I'm assuming he did a reconnaissance and he targeted the opportune time in which to do that. I went to Walmart yesterday, and I was walking around Walmart, and I thought to myself, looking at the cashiers, looking at the amount of people that were flowing through, looking at the entrances and exits, that there were no law enforcement, that there were no security guards, there was nothing, how much or how easy it would be to target anybody in these stores with a mass amount of people. You ever go to a Costco on Sunday or on Saturday? I mean, there's like 100,000 people at the Costco in Prescott on any given Saturday. I also was happy to hear that the blood bank in El Paso in the situation, the blood bank was up and running. They had several different locations that were assisting. They were actually tapped out in their ability to take any more blood because they couldn't hold it because so many people came in donating blood to help the victims, which this situation was obviously a mass casualty. Here's some things to think about. One, your everyday carry that you get kitted up with every single morning matters. I did a little post on my story and said, hey, here's a picture of my Solomons. I don't always wear flip-flops. When I was an independent contractor working overseas, I remember working in Yemen and my team leader telling me like, hey man, you can't be walking around in flip-flops. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, we're not really working. And he said, in this environment, you're always working. And you always have to be prepared to run at a full sprint to your weapon to help others, and you can't do that in flip-flops. And he was right. He was completely right. Now, am I advocating that you're not supposed to wear flip-flops? No, I'm not. But your operational environment, which is how I think about things in life, matters. If I'm going out to a country concert with my family, if you are going out to a country concert with your family and you're dragging your kids there, yeah, it would be nice to be in your flip-flops, your Tevas, your board shorts. But how are you going to get your family out of that bad situation if something bad happened? It doesn't have to be a mass shooting. It could be an accident. It could be a storm. It could be a natural disaster. How are you going to be able to take care of your family? And if it's as easy as making a decision like, I'm wearing shoes instead of flip-flops, then it's that easy. Your everyday carry, every single morning that you prep your equipment, is the first strategy in developing the right mindset, resilience, and response to something bad that happens. One, because it gives you confidence in what your capabilities are. Every single morning I have these Fieldcraft mats. I don't sell them anymore, I just give them away. But they're basically these mouse pads. They represent a staging area for all my stuff. One, I have TBI, so I forget shit all the time. But two, I want all my stuff centralized, so that way there's a routine and a formality for when I get kitted up. I take my gun out of my holster, my Fieldcraft Survival appendix carry low-vis holster. I take my Tri-Arc pistol out, I drop the mag, I look at the magazine, look how many rounds are inside of it, I insert it, I press check my gun. Yes, press check your gun to make sure there's one in the chamber. I manually ride the slide forward, I insert it inside of the holster, and then I put it inside my waistband because I know that it's loaded with one in the chamber. I know I have 17 plus one, and everything is good to go. Now I have the confidence that when I reach for that gun, there is no hesitation. Hey, did I put one in the chamber? Did I load this thing up? Has anybody touched my gun since the last time that I've seen it? And so I have confidence when I put that gun in my waistband that I can properly defend myself. I take my tourniquet. I open my tourniquet up and I look at it. I collapse it down on itself and I insert it inside the waistband holster that we have, and I put it inside my waistband. If I'm doing something where it's the middle of summer and I got a t-shirt on, I'll stick it inside of my Patagonia bag. I got a little fly fishing bag where I carry my stuff. But I want to make sure that I have a routine set in place that gives me the confidence that everything that I have on my person, on myself, is set up for success. It gives you the mindset, the proper mindset to defend life. You know, a lot of people don't think this way because they think it's laced in paranoia. They go, oh, why are you doing that, man? Like, why are you sitting in the back of the room near the exit? Like, you must be paranoid. It's not paranoia. Perception isn't always reality. A lot of people perceive that the habits that you might have that lead to good actions and set yourself up for preparedness and survival, that somehow that's a bad thing. It's like the kids who think getting straight A's is bad. Oh, you got straight A's, right? Oh, well, no, I got some C's too. Oh, okay, then you're cool. What the fuck is that all about? So it's like if I prepare, then I'm paranoid, right? Because then I'm spliced out of the demographic and then put in a fringe. And then I'm told like I'm paranoid. Oh, well, that's Mike, man. He's a former Green Beret. You know, he's got some issues. You know, he dealt with war. Everybody says that shit until shit hits the fan. And then you're the one dragging your family off the X. You're the one defending your life on the X. And then everybody else is a fucking victim. Think defense. Think defense. When I look at the Walmart, it is a soft target any given day of the week with a large amount of people whom more than likely aren't carrying because there's a sticker on the door that says don't carry. The way the parking lot is set up, the avenue of approach, it running right in front of the doors, which means quick entry and exit. The amount of traffic that flows in and out, which is really predictable. The aisles, which are layered in predictability and patterns. It's very easy to exploit that environment. Very easy. You would need a long gun to affect a lot of damage in that instance. So then, let's say you're in Walmart, and you're 100 meters away from the bad guy who's standing in an alley, in an aisle with an AK-47. Is he an immediate threat? You're damn right he is. At 3,000 feet per second out of that muzzle, he could touch you in milliseconds, fractions of seconds, at the speed of sound. And so, having your pistol and combating a guy running around Walmart with a plan is probably not the best approach. Somebody asked me, they said, hey, in this instance, I had my family and I broke off the X and I wanted to get away, but I feel guilty because I didn't fight and stop the shooter. And I told him, stop, man. Your duty that day was not to defend everybody that was in that store. It was to protect your family and get off the X. If you're not truly confident in your capabilities, there's also a window of opportunity, and you're not in that window of opportunity, then the best thing you could do is get your family out of that danger area. And that's what this guy did. You shouldn't feel guilty for doing that. I hate to say it, but it's not your duty to save lives. It's my duty. As somebody who's a trained soldier, it's my duty. If there was an off-duty officer in that Walmart, if there was a former soldier who was armed, sailor, marine, whatever, airman, whatever, then it's their duty. But as a civilian, it's your duty to protect yourself. First, you need to protect your family and yourself, first and foremost. Breaking contact off the X is the tactic that we use in mass and public shootings. Separating yourself with as many obstacles, as much distance, and as much time as you can between you and where the bad guy's located. Unlike that arrogant dumbass who was walking around in the aisles talking to himself on a story on Instagram. So, the political response, as you currently see right now, it's been many. There is a metric shit ton of people who are coming out from the media, speaking out of their suckholes who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. There's politicians coming out of the woodwork. I have it lined out via this media source what each politician said, line by line, on the shooting in response to it, and all of it's political. Let's start with some of let's start with the Democrats because that's where it came from. So, this guy, Beto O'Rourke, this guy came out and he says that he actually was asked by CNN if he thought that Trump was a white nationalist, and he said he did. El Paso native, he's a former Texas Republican, former Texas representative, said President Donald Trump and his rhetoric about minorities has a direct connection with the shooting in the presidential candidate's hometown. I mean, think about that. I mean, this guy just equated what a psychopath murderer did to the President of the United States rhetoric, saying that his rhetoric about minorities is directly connected to the shooting. basically blaming Trump for it. Jake Tapper on Sunday asked O'Rourke if he thinks Trump is a white nationalist. He said, yes, I do. The things that he said as both a candidate and then as president, this cannot be open for debate. O'Rourke, who has been campaigning in Vegas, canceled his events to fly home. Here's what he tweets. He says, my heart is broken for El Paso, for Dayton, for everyone who is impacted by the 40,000 gun deaths in our country every year. It's on each and every one of us to end this crisis, and together, I still have faith that we will. Here's his problem. Here's his problem in his rhetoric. One, he says 40,000 gun deaths in our country every year. 2/3 of that 40,000 gun deaths, two-thirds of that 40,000 gun deaths is suicide. The other large majority of that is criminal-related, gang activity-related gun deaths. The smallest percentage of all that is obviously the mass shootings. 40,000 gun deaths is a lot of gun deaths. But as I quoted recently on Instagram about the statistics in Chicago, 5 to 7 people are killed in that city every single weekend. So 40,000 gun deaths would make it seem like there's an epidemic of mass shootings that are killing people and guns are the problem. Well, think about it this way. How many of those guns that people used in crime on crime, gangbangers killing gangbangers, how many of those guns do you think are legally owned guns? Probably not a lot of them, right? Because most of those people are felons. Most of those guys are felons, so they can't buy guns legally. Outside of the mental health crisis that we're facing in our world today, our country is faced with a behavioral health epidemic that you can't even wrap your head around. That's the issue. But he states it like 40,000 gun deaths in our country every year, associating it with a mass shooting, makes everybody who reads that, who supports this guy, Beto O'Rourke, that there's an epidemic of mass shootings, of white people going out and murdering people all over the United States. But that's not what's happening. So that's where I do agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson on his analysis of statistics and data, which is never to make it seem like the event is not important because when compared to data, it's not as large. Because it is important to note that when a guy walks in and kills people in a public setting by the dozens, that's significant. But it's also important to note that we're talking about real statistics of gun deaths, and there is not an epidemic of mass shootings that are taking place. It doesn't mean you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't mean that you don't think about it. It doesn't mean you don't prepare for it. But statistically, when you're looking at the gun deaths, these guys are throwing it around just to get reaction, to get likes, to get votes. These guys are not incentivized by anything other than their own preservation, their own empowerment. They're politicians. You tell me how Nancy Pelosi is worth $100 million. I was worth like $50 and a ham sandwich, operating at the highest level of counterterrorism and special operations. When I left that, I was broke and almost damn near homeless, sleeping on an air mattress in my apartment. But a politician is worth $100 million. She hasn't done anything besides politics her entire life, and she's worth $100 million. So just be careful what politicians say. Julian Castro, I'm probably hacking that, in the past 24 hours, he tweets, our nation suffered 29 murders and 2 mass shootings. We could have protected these victims with common sense gun reform. It's not too late to prevent the next attack. Congress and the president must act now, right? Because it's about gun reform. We could have protected these victims with common sense gun reform. How do you predict a human being who's broken, hell-bent on violence from getting a weapon of any kind and destroying lives when they're hell-bent on it? How do you prevent that? Here's what you have to understand about gun control and gun laws. When you react via these incidents that happen, when you politically shape and change laws, being reactive to something like this happening, you are only impeding legal, law-abiding citizens from owning firearms and defending their own lives. That's the only thing that you're doing. You should take the model of Chicago, for example, as a perfect example of what murderers do in order to get the job done. So I don't have a gun on the streets and I need to kill a bad guy. And I'm a bad guy. What do? Well, if I can't get a burner, I go and I try to steal one or try to buy one or talk to somebody who tried to steal one or try to buy one. And then I get a dirty gun. And then I pass that amongst my friends to get the job done. A lot of people say, they frame these conversations and they go, well, these guns were legally purchased. What difference does that make? That the guns were legally purchased. So, in the analysis of understanding terrorists, when terrorists want to commit acts of terror, how do we impede it? So, we get shot up in an ambush by AK-47s. Do we say we have to go after the AK-47s? Because if we stop the AKs, then we stop the murdering of our troops in the field. Foreign terrorists come into these countries and they plant IEDs and they blow up our troops. Do we say the IEDs are the problems? We need to stop these terrorist attacks and killing American troops overseas. We need to go after the IEDs. We need to find the IEDs where they are and stop them. No, that's not what we do. We go after the terrorist cells that are responsible for attacking people outside of looking at the specific weapon systems that are used. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fall in the realm of logic and reason when you start going to reform guns for law-abiding citizens. Any gun reform. Look, this would be a different situation if we're talking about the beginning times of our nation. And there wasn't 100 million guns in circulation, which is shying on the left side of that. It's hundreds of millions of guns in circulation. That would be a different story. But now the only thing that Democrats want to do, because they're shocking and awing you with their disinformation and statistics, is saying we have to go after common sense gun reform, because that's what have prevented these murders. He literally says, Julian Castro literally says, we could have protected these victims with common sense gun reform. You know how you could have protected the victims? By arming every single person that was inside that Walmart. By having an armed guard standing or somewhere inside that Walmart with a gun. That's how you would have protected those innocent people. Going down, you have Joe Biden. Heartbroken to hear the news from El Paso. Our thoughts are with those impacted by yet another senseless act of gun violence. I love labels, man. Gun violence. Because it's gun violence. So then if people start using other means, like airplanes, like helicopters, like vehicles, then it's helicopter violence. Then we're focused on the helicopter. Then it's car violence. Then we're focused on the car. The problem is fucking people. And so when we start coming back to fucking earth and talking about the reality, then we can start addressing the problem, which is behavioral health, which is psychopath murderers. One of the things I heard Trump say this morning, one of the things that made sense, a lot of it didn't, was when he said, we need to look at these video games that are desensitizing our children and making it okay and even motivating people to enact violence. They're so disassociated from violence. You talk to a kid, he can tell you 10 ways to murder somebody. You punch him in the face and he'll cry like a little girl. Because these children growing up today aren't prepared for the real world. They're living in a fantasy, a virtual world, and they are desensitized. Grossman's talked about it in On Killing and On Combat decades ago, where these kids were becoming more dissociative the more they played video games, building eye-hand coordination, and were able to replicate a POV perspective and murder people senselessly without understanding the consequence. Another part of the problem, there is no consequence. You could be an internet troll, you could be a loser bully in school, you could do all this shit, and there's no consequence. But we don't want to talk about the real issue. We want to talk about the fact that it's tied to a gun. He continues to say, how many lives must be cut short? How many communities must be torn apart? It's past time we take action and end our gun violence epidemic. You want to talk about fucking gun violence? I just told you 2/3 of 40,000 people, 2/3 of 40,000 people took their own guns, put them in their fucking mouths, and blew their brains out. That's not an epidemic? Suicide, mental health isn't a fucking epidemic? That's an epidemic. Mass shootings are bad, but it's not an epidemic. But again, politicians are trying to sway you on their side because it's about the win. It's not about facts and reality and actually looking at statistics, actually looking at data and analyzing that, coming up with solutions. It's about the rhetoric. Because the rhetoric sells fucking votes. That's why. Bernie Sanders says Mitch McConnell should bring the Senate back into session immediately to pass H.R. 8, the gun safety bill that has already passed the House. That's a first step addressing our serious gun violence epidemic. I think there is validity in Bernie Sanders' comment, because I think there needs to be better ways to legislate who gets a gun, how they get a gun, and then this trade gun show loophole. I mean, I just don't want dumbasses going to flea markets everywhere across the U.S. and just buying guns with no accountability. I mean, I don't like that, because there are a lot of dumbass people on this planet, and I see them all the time. I interact with them on social media all the time. I want to know that the people who are getting guns are going through mechanisms, protocol, like background investigations. Will this deter mass shootings? Fuck no. Will it deter suicides? No, it won't. Will it deter people in the inner cities of Baltimore and Chicago murdering each other? Nope, it won't. It's a different consideration completely. But I think it needs to be there. There needs to be better systems in place. Should we be analyzing and dictating how much ammo a person can buy per time they go to the fucking gun store? No. Fuck no. But should we pass common sense legislation like background investigations and checks, cross-referencing with mental health issues? Has a doctor ever said this guy's crazy and he could fucking hurt somebody? Well, then we might want to flag him. Those processes and protocols aren't in place now. You come back, you don't have any tickets, you don't have any misdemeanors, you don't have any felonies, you're good to go. Nothing really comprehensive about that. He says we must come together to reject this dangerous and growing culture of bigotry espoused by Trump and his allies. Instead of wasting money putting children in cages, we must seriously address the scourge of violence and bigotry and domestic terrorism. Here's Elizabeth Warren. Oh man, the Native American Elizabeth Warren. We're waking up to the second mass shooting in as many days. I'm heartsick for the 29 people killed this weekend in El Paso and Dayton, and all the other lives we lose every day due to senseless gun violence. We need to take urgent action to end the gun violence epidemic. I can give you a 10-step protocol to that. Kamala Harris, last week it was Gilroy, today it's El Paso. How can our country tolerate this? Where were you, Mrs. Harris, where were you last weekend when 5 children were murdered in Chicago? Where were you? My prayers are yet again with families who are grieving, and my thanks are with the first responders. That is not enough. We must act. Last one, Amy Klubucher. Sorry, I'm hacking these names. I'm not good with names. My heart breaks for El Paso and those killed and injured by another mass shooting. This can't keep happening. It just can't. Everyday Congress refuses to act and pass gun laws. Is a horrible omission. You know, the Run, Hide, Fight acronym has been used many times by the U.S. government and institutions for teaching active shooting protocol. There's a lot more in depth than that. We don't use that acronym. We think that acronym actually sets a bad precedence for bad habits and bad ways of thinking under stressful conditions. And so make sure you give that a listen. I want to take a little break right now. Thanks, guys. I'm going to take a break right now and get Raul on here and get some feedback. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully it didn't cut off.